All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to be exploring the sweeping 40,000-year history of how Japan transitioned from a rigidly isolated feudal society into the modern economic titan we know today. It's a truly fascinating story of extremes. If you want to really understand Japanese history, think of it like a massive pendulum, just swinging wildly back and forth between eagerly soaking up outside influences and then completely bolting its doors shut to the rest of the world.
Just think about this wild paradox for a second. Today, we know Japan as this global cultural and technological hub, right? Welcoming millions of international visitors every single year who flock to its massive cities and ancient temples. Yet, for well over 2 centuries, from the 17th to the 19th centuries, its borders were entirely bolted shut. Zero visitors. And honestly, this period of extreme isolation is what birthed so many of the iconic cultural treasures we associate with Japan today. So how on earth does a country go from complete, total lockdown to a global powerhouse?
Well, starting with our first era, emperors and elite warriors. To really get a grasp on this pendulum swing, we need to look back at the rise of the early imperial courts and, of course, the legendary samurai.
For centuries, Japan was actually incredibly open to the outside world, just eagerly absorbing mainland Asian influences. As early as 552 AD, Buddhism was brought over from Korea. By 645 AD, they implement the Taika reforms, which was essentially them copying and pasting the political landscape of the Chinese imperial court. Then, in 794 AD, the capital is permanently fixed in Kyoto, kicking off the Heian period, famous for all its rich art and poetry. But you know how it goes. The imperial court gets so wrapped up in internal, grandiose politics that they kind of forget about the rest of the country. Central authority weakens, and power just splinters right into the hands of local warrior clans.
In that power vacuum, it led straight to the rise of the samurai. After a massive, bloody conflict called the Genpei War in 1180s, the Minamoto clan seizes ultimate power. They set up a totally separate military government in Kamakura, far away from the emperor in Kyoto. In 1192, Minamoto Yoritomo convinces the emperor to grant him the title of Shogun, or Great General. That basically made him the de facto, the actual military dictator of all Japan. And that one move initiated 700 years of strict rule by the Shoguns.
And here is where you really see Japan's historical resilience shine. In the 13th century, Kublai Khan's massive Mongol empire decides to attempt 2 full-scale invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281. Both times, these heavily outnumbered samurai march down to the beaches to meet them, but they're ultimately saved when these catastrophic typhoons suddenly sweep in and just wipe the Mongol fleets off the map. The Japanese revered these unbelievable storms as the kamikaze, or divine wind.
But fighting off the Mongols was not cheap. It totally bankrupted the shogunate, which plunges us right into our next chapter: chaos, guns, and unification. Sparked by the Onin War in 1467, the central system just completely collapses. Local feudal lords, known as daimyos, carve up the nation into this crazy patchwork of independent warring states. It's the Sengoku Period, and it pushed military innovation to its absolute limits. We're talking warlords utilizing everything from covert assassins, ninjas for espionage, to deploying fierce Buddhist warrior monks called Sohei on the battlefields. It was a relentless, chaotic grab for power.
So here is a really crucial takeaway. Look how incredibly fast Japan adapts to outside technology when their survival is on the line. In 1543, a lost Portuguese trading ship gets blown off course and lands on the island of Tanejima. They bring 2 things, Christianity and European muskets. The Japanese warlords see the tactical advantage instantly. Get this, within just 13 years of that single ship arriving, over 300,000 firearms had been manufactured and deployed across Japan's civil wars. That is a staggering technological leap in just a little over a decade.
And that rapid tech adaptation essentially paved the way for a reunified state driven by 3 absolute powerhouse leaders. First, Oda Nobunaga harnesses those European muskets to crush his rivals. After he's assassinated, his loyal follower Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who is this amazing historical figure, starting as a humble peasant and rising to become a top samurai, steps up and unites the realm. Finally, after Hideyoshi dies, Tokugawa Ieyasu emerges victorious at the massive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. He sets up a brand new shogunate in Edo, which we now call Tokyo, and kicks off an era of peace that lasts 268 uninterrupted years.
Which brings us to the era of strict isolation. With the nation finally firmly unified, the pendulum violently swings away from the outside world. The new shogunate decides, you know what, we are prioritizing domestic peace over international engagement. They were deeply afraid of the destabilizing influence of foreign powers, and especially the spread of Christianity. So the government rolls out a policy called sakoku, literally meaning closed country, in 1639.
They outlaw Christianity, they forbid any Japanese citizen from traveling abroad or even building an ocean-going ship, and they ban almost all outside visitors. But here's the crazy part. By locking the country down, Japan fosters this booming domestic economy. The population doubles to 30 million, and we see a massive, incredible flourishing of unique Japanese art and culture.
To really grasp just how intense this isolation was, picture this. The only glimpse of European science or ideas allowed into the entire country came from a handful of Dutch merchants. And they weren't even allowed to step foot on the mainland. They were literally quarantined on Dejima, this tiny, artificial, man-made island in Nagasaki Harbor. Any Dutch books covering European scientific discoveries had to be meticulously translated and trickled out from this single isolated trading post.
But as we know, peace and isolation never last forever. Severe famines in the 1830s started showing real cracks in the shogunate's armor, bringing us to forced open and rapid modernization. Because in 1853, Japan's era of absolute lockdown was violently shattered by the arrival of American warships.
Led by Commodore Matthew Perry, the U.S. fleet just sails straight into Edo Bay, and the message was crystal clear. Open your ports to trade, or we are going to use military force. Unable to match the sheer power of Western weaponry, the shogunate reluctantly caves. But this surrender deeply angers the southern provinces. They end up forming an alliance, overthrow the shogunate entirely in the Boshin War, and successfully restore the young Emperor Meiji to supreme power in 1868. The game had completely changed.
They renamed the capital from Edo to Tokyo, and the new Meiji government goes into an absolute all-out sprint to modernize. The pendulum is swinging back to global integration fast. They build extensive railways and telegraph lines everywhere, set up a universal education system, and hire hundreds of Western advisors to teach them banking and law. Crucially, they adopt Western military tactics to forge a massive standing army. But this sprint was so rapid and thorough that it tragically made the traditional samurai completely obsolete, eventually leading to the crushing of the samurai class itself.
Now, empowered by this incredibly rapid industrialization and a shiny new modern military, Japan starts expanding aggressively, basically trying to copy the colonial empires of the West. In 1895, they defeat China and annex Taiwan. In 1905, they absolutely stun the globe by annihilating the Russian Navy at the Battle of Tsushima, literally the first time in decades an Asian power defeated a Western one. This momentum led them to annex Korea in 1910, and as fascist sentiments grew globally, they eventually ally with the Axis powers. This extreme expansionism peaks in 1941, when Japan launches a surprise attack on the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into the devastating reality of World War II.
And that aggressive, unchecked expansionism of the early 20th century ultimately brings absolute devastation to the Japanese mainland. Which moves us to our final era, devastation and the economic miracle. Following years of horrific, costly battles across the Pacific, the United States was desperate to avoid a ground invasion of Japan. So, in August 1945, the U.S. unleashes a newly developed secret weapon, dropping 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was just unfathomable, killing well over 100,000 people. This sheer devastation forced Emperor Hirohito to get on national radio and announce the nation's unconditional surrender, finally ending World War II. Under the Allied occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, Japan has to literally reinvent itself from the ground up. The military is completely disarmed, and the government undergoes massive democratization. Emperor Hirohito gets to stay on the throne, but he has to publicly renounce his divine status. So, stripped of all military ambition, what does Japan do? They take that renowned, legendary work ethic and pivot entirely, channeling every ounce of national energy into economic development, tech, and consumer goods.
And you just have to look at the sheer scale of this rebound. It's amazing. Under the guidance of Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, Japan rises from the literal ashes of the world's most destructive conflict. By 1955, their economy had already passed its pre-war levels. By 1968, they are the second largest capitalist economy on the entire planet. They established themselves as the absolute dominant global leaders in making cars and electronics. It is, for all intents and purposes, a breathtaking economic miracle.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. How exactly does a totally devastated nation reinvent itself entirely? Japan's extraordinary 40,000-year journey from warring clans to a lockdown fortress to utter devastation and finally to a peaceful, high-tech powerhouse proves that a nation's destiny is never, ever permanently written in stone. It's just a powerful testament to the tenacity of a culture that knows exactly how to weather the wildest swings of the pendulum. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.